The Bay of Fundy, Canada. Here the planet breathes. Twice each day, 160 billion tons of seawater surge into this narrow channel, and twice each day they retreat, bearing the ocean floor. This water is a liquid archive. It carries the secrets of the Atlantic, the splinters of shipwrecks, the echoes of forgotten histories. For 10 years, the DuPont family had plied these waters in their fishing trawler. Their work was a relentless routine, heavy and monotonous. Net, winch, catch, over and over. But on a cold June day in 2017, amidst the cod and seaweed, the nets brought something else to the deck. An object that had no place there. A small, cloudy green bottle, sealed with a wax stopper. Inside, a tightly rolled slip of paper was visible. A message in a bottle. It is a cliché, a child's fantasy. But there was something unsettling about this one. The bottle was old, its form betraying the hand-blown craftsmanship of the early 20th century. The cork was desiccated and cracked by time. The paper within was fragile, yellowed, covered in faded lines of elegant calligraphic script. With painstaking care, fearing the message would disintegrate into dust, the fishermen extracted it. The text was in French, and what they managed to decipher made the air freeze in their lungs. I am throwing this bottle into the sea, in the middle of the Atlantic. We are about to perish. In a few days, I will be 13 years old. Then came the words that transformed the artifact from a simple curiosity into a historical sensation. From the Titanic. Goodbye all. Mathilde Lefebvre. Titanic. The word needs no translation. It resonates in the collective consciousness, a synonym for catastrophe, for hubris, for an icy death. And now, more than a century after the greatest liner of its age plunged to the ocean floor, the sea had seemingly surrendered one of its lost voices, the final farewell of a 12-year-old girl doomed to the freezing water. The news spread across the globe instantly. Experts, historians, and descendants of survivors all held their breath. Could it be true? Could this fragile letter have survived a century in the merciless embrace of the Atlantic, delivering the last echo of the world's most famous maritime tragedy? But as scientists began their investigation, the initial euphoria gave way to a creeping unease. The details did not align. Small, almost imperceptible anomalies in the paper, the ink, the very trajectory of the bottle's drift began to form a disturbing picture. The investigation, which had begun as a search to confirm a miracle, transformed into something else. It became a hunt for a ghost. An attempt to understand what this object truly was, a genuine voice from the past, or the most cruel and sophisticated hoax in modern history. The answer they sought would ultimately reveal less about the object itself and more about our profound, unending desire to hear the whispers of the dead, to find meaning in the silence the ocean so jealously keeps. To understand the weight of what was lost, one must return to that night. The night of April 14th, 1912, when the world was irrevocably changed. The Titanic was never just a ship. It was a symbol, the ultimate expression of the Gilded Age, of its unshakable faith in technology, in progress, in the permanence of the established order. A leviathan of 4 funnels, spanning the length of 3 football fields, rising to the height of an 11-story building. It was the largest, most luxurious moving object ever conceived by human hands. Its creators at the White Star Line called it unsinkable, a floating palace, and this was not empty bravado. The ship was a genuine marvel of engineering, a double-bottomed hull, 16 watertight compartments that could be sealed from the bridge with the press of a single button. Even if
This is where things get really interesting. What you're about to hear might explain why this was never meant to be discovered.
4 of these chambers were breached, the vessel was designed to remain afloat. A catastrophe was deemed a mathematical impossibility. For this reason, an atmosphere of absolute serenity reigned on board. 2,224 souls, passengers and crew, sailed toward their destiny. On its decks, a perfect cross-section of Western society drifted across the ocean. In the opulent suites of the upper decks traveled the titans of industry, the aristocrats, the millionaires. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in America. Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a mining empire. Isidore and Ida Strauss, the owners of Macy's department store. For them, Titanic was an exclusive club at sea, a place to broker deals, host grand dinners, and indulge in the zenith of service. Below them, in the second-class cabins, journeyed the professional class, the engineers, the teachers, the clergymen, who could afford their own taste of this splendor. And lower still, in third class, in cramped cabins tucked into the bow and stern, was the ship's most numerous contingent. More than 700 people. They were the emigrants. Irish, Swedes, Finns, Italians, Levantines, and Armenians. People who had staked their entire existence, selling their modest belongings for a one-way ticket. A ticket to a new life. For them, the Titanic was not a palace. It was an ark. A vessel of hope, destined to carry them from an old world of hardship to the promised land of America. To this group, the silent majority of the Titanic, belonged the Lefebvre family. The father, Franck, a 40-year-old miner from the town of Calonne in northern France. The mother, Marie, 40 years old. And their 4 children, 10-year-old Celeste, 8-year-old Anselme, 6-year-old Jean, and the eldest, Mathilde, who was set to turn 13 just days after they were to arrive in America. Relatives already established in the United States, in the state of Iowa. They were not sailing in an exclusive club, but in a covenant with the future. A future held within the steel walls of a ship that carried the dreams of one world into the dawn of another. This story was a familiar one among the passengers of the third class. A story of hardship, of poverty, and of a desperate hope for a better future. They boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France, on the evening of April 10th. To them, the colossal chute would become their tomb. At 11:40 in the evening on April 14th, in a cold, moonless, and utterly still night, the impossible happened. Lookout Frederick Fleet spotted an iceberg dead ahead. 3 sharp strikes of the bell rang out, the signal for danger. First Officer Murdoch gave the desperate command, "Hard a starboard, full astern!" But it was too late. The ship's titanic inertia made a swift maneuver impossible. With a monstrous grinding shudder, the starboard side of the Titanic scraped along the submerged mass of ice. The impact was not violent. Many passengers never even felt it. But it was fatal. Length of nearly 100 meters, breaching not 4 but 6 of the ship's watertight compartments. The verdict from her designer, Thomas Andrews, who was on board, was a death sentence. The ship had an hour, 2 at the most. What followed was not a sudden panic. It was the slow, methodical, and monstrously unjust collapse of an entire world. The fundamental problem was not that the ship was sinking. The problem was the lifeboats. There were only 20. Even at full capacity, they could hold just 1,178 people, little more than half of all souls on board. And not even that number was reached. In the chaos of the evacuation, fueled by confusion and the refusal of many to believe the unsinkable ship was truly foundering, lifeboat after lifeboat was lowered half empty. Priority was given to the women and children of the first and second classes. The passengers of the third class were trapped. A confusing labyrinth of corridors, locked gates, and language barriers all conspired against them. Of the more than 700 passengers in third class, only a quarter would survive. The Lefebvre family vanished in the catastrophe. Not one of them survived. Their names appear on the list of the lost. Their bodies, if ever recovered, were never identified. They simply dissolved into the frozen.
Stay with me, because what comes next has been hidden for a very long time, and only a few people know the truth behind it.
Night, becoming another line in a statistic. Until June 2017. Until the moment a small green bottle was pulled from the sea and brought onto the deck of a Canadian trawler. The message from Mathilde Lefebvre was not merely a letter. It was a voice breaking through from the blackest void of the tragedy. The voice of a child from third class, testifying that in her final moments, as her world burned and sank, she thought not of herself, but of those she had left behind on shore. She found the time, the paper, the pencil, and the bottle to say one last goodbye. An act of love against the encroaching dark, a final human whisper sent out across a century of silence. The world desperately wanted to believe. But in forensics, as in the annals of history, emotion is a treacherous guide. The true investigation was only just beginning. The first object on the analyst's table was the bottle itself. If the message inside were genuine, its container would have to be a perfect time capsule. It needed to be 100% consistent with the era and possess the fortitude to survive 105 years in the corrosive embrace of the North Atlantic. At first glance, the evidence held. The bottle was fashioned from thick, greenish glass, bearing the telltale imperfections of its time. Air bubbles suspended within, an uneven surface. It was a clear indicator of the hand-blown method, a craft being eclipsed by automated production in the early 20th century. Its shape was typical for the inexpensive wine or lemonade of the period. But the truth, as always, was hidden in the details. Specialists in historical glass placed the bottle under the microscope. Their focus? The seams. Before 1903, when Michael Owens invented the fully automatic bottle machine, glass was pressed in two-part molds. This process left two vertical seams running up the sides, stopping short of the very top. The neck was shaped separately by hand. The bottle in question matched this description perfectly. The seams terminated precisely at the base of the neck. It was a promising sign. Then the experts turned their attention to the base. There they found a maker's mark. Faint, almost erased by time and sand, but legible under specialized light. It belonged to a renowned French glass company, Verrerie Charbonneau, founded in Reims in 1870. The firm had indeed produced millions of such bottles, but meticulous research into the company's archives in France revealed a more complicated story. In 1910, Verrerie Charbonneau had modernized its equipment. They began using semi-automatic machines that left a distinctive circular scar on the bottom of the bottle. The bottle recovered from the Canadian coast bore no such scar. This meant it had to have been produced using the older, pre-1910 technology. The evidence seemed to confirm its age. But it was here that the first, undeniable problem emerged: the cork. It was made not of solid wood, but of compressed cork granules, bonded with an adhesive. This type of stopper was only mass-produced for inexpensive beverages after the First World War, well into the 1920s. In 1912, even the cheapest of bottles were sealed with a single, solid piece of cork. This small, seemingly insignificant fact was the first fissure in the foundation of the legend. Then came the wax that sealed the cork. Chemical analysis of its composition revealed the presence of synthetic polymers not yet invented at the time of the great ship's demise. A story, once told, takes on a life of its own. It can offer comfort, connection, a tangible link to a lost world. But
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss what's coming next. Because
the physical world is an unforgiving archivist. It does not bend to our desires. In its silent, immutable details, it keeps a record of the only truth that matters, the one that actually was. The wax seal contained polymers that would not be used in manufacturing until the 1930s. A genuine seal from 1912 would have been composed of shellac, natural resins, and organic dyes. This was modern. The fabric of the story began to unravel. Before the team was an old bottle manufactured before 1910, but it was stopped with a cork from the 1920s and sealed with wax from the 1930s. It was a chronological impossibility. Either someone had discovered an old, empty bottle and used it to craft a hoax decades after the Titanic was lost to the sea, or something else was at play. But there was no other explanation. These, however, were merely the external trappings. The ultimate proof was locked inside: the paper and the ink. Their analysis would either confirm the greatest find of the century or bury it forever. A document submerged in the ocean for more than a century is a forensic nightmare. Salt, bacteria, and the constant motion of the water all conspire toward its utter destruction. And yet, the letter from Mathilde appeared astonishingly well preserved. The paper was fragile but intact. The text, though faded, was entirely legible. At the University of Quebec at Rimouski, an interdisciplinary team was assembled. They would deploy an arsenal of the most advanced, non-invasive methods to probe the relic without causing it harm. First, the paper. Under the microscope, it revealed itself to be made of wood pulp, created using the sulfite process, a method consistent with the era. This was precisely the kind of paper mass-produced in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was inexpensive, but not durable, its high acidity causing the fibers to decay over time. The fact that the letter had survived at all was a miracle in itself. But then, Raman spectroscopy, a method that interrogates the molecular makeup of a substance by bathing it in laser light, exposed a strange detail. The paper's composition included traces of optical brighteners, chemical compounds that absorb ultraviolet light, making paper appear whiter and brighter to the human eye. Such agents only entered widespread use in the paper industry after the 1950s. This was the second profound anomaly. Next, it was the turn of the ink. In 1912, most people wrote with iron gall ink, a permanent concoction made from iron salts and gallic acid derived from oak galls. This ink was durable, but it had a defining characteristic. Over time, it would deeply embed itself into the paper, corroding the fibers and leaving a distinctive brownish or reddish hue. Most importantly, its composition always contained iron. X-ray fluorescence analysis of Mathilde's letter showed not the slightest trace of iron. Instead, it revealed the presence of carbon. It was a soot-based ink, akin to India ink. While such inks did exist in 1912, they were far less common for correspondence, as they could be easily washed away by water. The final pieces fell into place, not with a whisper, but with the cold, unwavering silence of scientific fact. The layers of deception, carefully constructed across decades, were peeled back one by one. The story was a phantom, a carefully crafted echo of a tragedy, designed to resonate with a world that still longed for messages from the deep. In our search for a connection to the past, we sometimes create the very history we wish to find. A truth written not in the indelible stain of iron, but in the fleeting shadow of carbon. How could it have survived for over 100 years in the brutal, unforgiving ocean? It was a question that defied easy answers. A riddle wrapped in glass. A chemical analysis of the binding agent, the very substance holding the ink's soot particles together, revealed its secret. It was not the gum arabic one would expect from the turn of the century, but synthetic polymers.
Most people stop watching right here, but if you continue, you'll discover something.
The telltale signature of modern ink. Finally, the paleographers, masters of historical handwriting, began their meticulous work. At first glance, the script was flawless. Neat, slanted, typical of the French schooling of the era. But under the trained eye, anomalies emerged. Subtle, almost imperceptible nuances. Certain letters, a lowercase p for instance, were formed in a style that only became common in France after an educational reform in the 1920s. They were small details, visible only to a professional, but they were there. More damning still was the very rhythm of the hand. The pressure, the flow. It was, in the opinion of the experts, far too even, too confident for a 12-year-old girl penning her final words in the throes of panic aboard a foundering ship. The script was too serene, too perfect. With each new examination, hope eroded. An old bottle, but a new cork. A new wax seal, new paper, new ink, and a new hand. Every piece of physical evidence pointed to a single, inescapable conclusion. This was a forgery. But this revelation only opened a deeper, more perplexing question. Who? Who would orchestrate such a detailed, elaborate hoax? And more importantly, why? To answer this, the investigation had to journey beyond chemistry and forensics, into the realms of human psychology and the vast, chaotic science of oceanography. For one last, powerful argument for the letter's authenticity remained: its incredible voyage.
Welcome to my channel. If you're fascinated by hidden truths, lost civilizations, and unsolved mysteries, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss what's coming next, because what you're about to see will change everything.
Even if every material clue was a lie, the simple fact of its discovery could not be ignored. The bottle was found in the Bay of Fundy. The wreck of the Titanic lies at a precisely known point in the North Atlantic, some 600 kilometers southeast of the coast of Newfoundland. Could a bottle, cast into the waves on the 15th of April 1912, truly navigate the currents to arrive in the Bay of Fundy by June of 2017? At first, it seems plausible. The two locations are not, on a map, impossibly distant. But the ocean is not a river. Its surface is a breathtakingly complex tapestry of currents, eddies, and counterflows, constantly shifting under the influence of wind, temperature, and salinity. To trace the bottle's hypothetical path, oceanographers turned to the most advanced computer models of our time. They fed the system every known variable: the precise starting coordinates, the date, the bottle's estimated weight and wind resistance. And then they ran the simulation. Not once, but thousands of times. The model accounted for every major current in the region. Chief among them, the immense Labrador Current, flowing south from the Arctic, wrapping around Newfoundland. This is the very current that carried the fateful iceberg into the path of the Titanic. And further south, it wages a timeless battle, colliding with the colossal force of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream, a warm river flowing from the southwest to the northeast, a relentless current bound for the shores of Europe. The results of the simulation were unequivocal. In an overwhelming majority, more than 98% of the scenarios, a bottle cast from the decks of the Titanic would never have reached the Bay of Fundy. It would have been seized by the Labrador Current and dragged far south into the central Atlantic. Or, more likely, it would have been captured by the immense power of the Gulf Stream. Years, perhaps decades later, it would have washed ashore on the coasts of Ireland, Scotland, or Norway. This is the inexorable path for most objects set adrift in these waters. To arrive in the Bay of Fundy, the bottle would have had to achieve the near impossible. It would have needed to somehow fight its way across the mighty flow of the Gulf Stream, then navigate a complex maze of coastal currents running west along the shores of Nova Scotia. The model conceded such a scenario was not an absolute impossibility, but its probability was less than 1/100th of 1%. It would have demanded a unique, almost fantastical confluence of events, a precise sequence of storms, pushing the bottle in just the right direction at just the right time. The oceanographers were cautious in their conclusions. They did not say impossible. They said extremely unlikely. But for investigators, this was the final nail in the coffin of the letter's authenticity. When you have a bottle with a new cork and fresh wax, containing a letter written on new paper with new ink in a modern hand, and it completes a journey with a probability of less than 1/100th of 1%, the conclusion becomes inescapable. The journey never happened. The bottle was not cast into the mid-Atlantic in 1912. It was dropped into the water not long before its discovery, somewhere near the coast of Canada. The myth crumbled. The miracle was a mystification. And with its collapse, a new task confronted the researchers. The investigation had not ended. It had just begun. For the question was no longer about finding the author of the letter, but the author of the forgery. To understand the motive behind this strange, almost poetic crime, who creates a historical forgery? The answer is more complex than it seems. The first and most obvious motive is financial gain. The infamous Hitler diaries, sold to a magazine for millions of marks in 1983, are a classic example. Their creator was a gifted swindler who simply wanted to get rich. But the letter of Mathilde Lefebvre was never sold. The fisherman who found it immediately handed it over to scientists. No one ever attempted to profit from it. A second motive is fame, the desire for a place in history. Consider the Piltdown Man, the notorious archaeological hoax of the early 20th century, when the world was presented with a skull purported to be the missing link between ape and man. For some, the temptation is not to find history, but to create it, to insert a personal fiction into the grand narrative, hoping the world will mistake a whisper for an echo of the past. Some forgeries are born of a desperate hunger for recognition, others from a desire to rewrite history, to prove a claim or slander a foe. But the letter of Mathilde Lefebvre sought neither fame for its creator, nor a revision of the past. It carried no ideological weight. It did not alter our understanding of the catastrophe, nor did it cast blame upon some new villain. This leaves a fourth, more complex and profoundly human motive, a psychological impulse. The desire not to deceive, but to connect, to become part of a great and terrible event, to create the story that, in the heart's logic, should have happened. The author was no cynical swindler. We see instead the hand of someone deeply immersed in the Titanic's lore, perhaps an amateur historian, a collector, or simply a romantic, haunted by the ghosts of the abyss. The details were painstakingly researched. The name of the real passenger, her age, even the bottle itself was a genuine article of the period. This was not a crude counterfeit, hastily assembled. It was a work of immense time, of deep knowledge, and, paradoxically, of love. A psychological profile begins to emerge. This is an individual who feels a profound empathy for the liner's victims, especially the most helpless, the children of the third class. They were likely moved by a sense of historical injustice. While volumes have been written about the wealthy and the powerful who went down with the ship,
Most people stop watching right here, but if you continue, you'll discover something almost no one knows.
of the Lefebvre family, we knew almost nothing. This forgery was an attempt to give them a voice, to create an artifact that would stand as a symbol for all the forgotten souls. In the mind of its creator, this may not have been a lie at all, but an act of poetic justice. They were not faking a document. They were restoring a piece of history that could have been. The clues suggest a person living in North America, somewhere near the coast, perhaps Quebec or the Canadian Maritimes, given the letter's French and where the bottle was found. They possess a keen knowledge of history, of calligraphy, perhaps even the antiques trade. They are patient, methodical, but they are not a professional, and here the illusion begins to fray. The mistakes are subtle, but damning. The cork, the wax seal, the chemical composition of the paper and the ink. These are the fine details an amateur would overlook. The very traps a professional, operating on the black market, would have painstakingly avoided. But this raises the final question. Why the elaborate staging? Why cast a bottle into the sea? Because a document, simply produced from a dusty archive, invites suspicion and cold analysis. But a bottle, plucked from the ocean after 100 years, that is not a document. That is the beginning of a legend. It is a story that bypasses the skeptical mind and speaks directly to the heart. The architect of the deception understood a fundamental human truth. The emotional power of the story would be so immense, many would simply refuse to see the inconsistencies. He was counting on our deep, abiding need to believe in miracles. And he was right. For a time, the entire world believed. The investigation that followed would never unmask the hoaxer. He remains a phantom, a ghost in the machine. But his creation, the letter itself, became a unique artifact, an object for intense study. It shed its identity as a historical document and was reborn as a relic of our own time. It stands as a testament to our inextinguishable drive for myth-making, and a stark reminder of the razor-thin line between history and fabrication. The letter of Mathilde Lefebvre is a forgery. The story ends. Or does it? That this bottle did not drift to us from the year 1912 does not diminish its significance. On the contrary, its true value lies precisely in the fact that it is a lie. This masterful deception acts as a distorted mirror, reflecting our own complex relationship with the past, and specifically with the tragedy of the Titanic. Why does the Titanic still hold such a grip on our imagination? It is not merely a shipwreck. There have been thousands. The Titanic is a myth. It is a modern parable of hubris and retribution, of class division, of heroism and of cowardice. It is a drama containing every essential element: love, death, betrayal, and ultimate self-sacrifice. Victims. We ache to hear the voices of those victims. We yearn to know their thoughts in their final, fleeting moments. We want a message from them, a note.
Most people stop watching right here, but if you continue, you'll discover something almost no one knows.
A last goodbye. The forger understood this profound, almost primal desire, and he gave us exactly what we craved. He crafted the perfect artifact, the voice of a child, a young girl on the cusp of her 13th birthday, facing death with an impossible dignity. The image is so powerful, it almost eclipses reality itself. It provides the emotional closure we never knew we were missing. In the true history of the Lefebvre family, there is nothing but a cold, statistical line in a list of the dead. But in the myth, born from an unknown hand, there is a letter. There is a final word. There is catharsis. And in this, we find both the great danger and the essential lesson of this affair. We live in an age of post-truth, where fabricated news and historical hoaxes are forged and spread with breathtaking speed. We find it easier to believe in a beautiful lie than in a complex and often brutal truth. Mathilde's letter is the perfect fake. It serves no malicious purpose. It does not incite hatred. It evokes only sympathy and sorrow. And that is precisely what makes it so effective. It reveals how easily our perception of the past can be manipulated by a simple appeal to our deepest emotions. But there is another side to this coin. The forgery forced the world to speak the name Lefebvre once more. It compelled historians and journalists to dig deeper into the archives, to chase the ghost of a family lost to the sea. The lie, in its own strange way, breathed new life into the search for a forgotten truth. It became a catalyst, proving that sometimes the path to history is not a straight line, but a winding road, paved with the myths we tell ourselves. Through a calculated deception, a real family was pulled from the mists of history. Marie Lefebvre and her 4 children, Mathilde, Céleste, Anselme, and Jean, for a fleeting moment, stepped out of the shadows. Their tragedy, buried for a century, was suddenly felt, relived by millions. In a profound paradox, it was a falsehood that resurrected a forgotten piece of historical memory. This forces a difficult question. Which holds more truth? The dry, dispassionate facts locked away in an archive? Or the myth that allows us to feel, to connect, to empathize across the chasm of time? The letter from Mathilde Lefebvre is a forgery, and yet the wave of emotion it created was undeniably genuine. Perhaps this was the creator's true purpose, not to deceive, but to force us to remember. We will never know what truly transpired for the Lefebvre family in those final, desperate hours. Were they locked below deck? Did they ever reach the open air to witness the last lights of the great ship forever bound to the crushing, absolute silence of the abyss? The message in a bottle was an attempt to break that silence, an attempt that failed as a historical document, but succeeded profoundly as an emotional gesture. Was the author of this elaborate fiction a cynical fraud, or a peculiar kind of artist, crafting a monument to memory and loss. How many other such truthful lies lie dormant in the depths of our history, waiting for a chance to be told? The truth, it seems, does not always reside on the surface. Sometimes, to find it, one must first be willing to believe in a lie.